The soft, buttery glow of the gas lamps at Maison Lumière was meant to be romantic. It was the kind of light that forgave small imperfections, that made a glass of Sazerac shimmer like liquid gold, that was supposed to cradle a decade of marriage in its warm, historic embrace. Nathan Adeyemi felt the warmth on his skin, but not in his soul. He watched his wife, Camille, across the small, linen-draped table. 10 years. A decade of shared mornings, quiet jokes, and the steady, unassuming architecture of a life built together. Or so he had thought. He had chosen this place deliberately. The building was a magnificent 1880s Creole townhouse, its bones strong and its history etched into the ornate ironwork of the balconies he could just glimpse through the tall, mullioned windows. As a civil engineer, Nathan didn't just see a beautiful restaurant. He saw the load-bearing walls, the masterful joinery and the cypress ceiling beams, the silent, stoic foundation that had held this elegance aloft for over a century. It was, to him, the perfect metaphor for a 10th anniversary. Endurance, beauty, a solid base. Camille, however, was not looking at the ceiling beams. Her gaze was fixed on the screen of her phone, her thumb a blur as it swiped and tapped. A small, tight smile was pinned to her lips. A smile not meant for him. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Nathan said, his voice a little too loud in the intimate space between them. He gestured vaguely at the room. "I read that the original plasterwork was restored by a team from France." Camille looked up, her eyes taking a moment to focus on him, as if she were surfacing from a deep dive. "Oh, yes, it's lovely, Nate. Very classic." The compliment was a perfectly wrapped, completely empty box. She placed her phone face down on the table, a gesture of concession that felt more like a temporary ceasefire. "Did you see the email from Brenda about the quarterly projections? They're through the roof." Nathan's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. No. I was thinking we could, not talk about work tonight." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Her skin was cool. 10 years, Cam, can you believe it? Her smile softened for a genuine, fleeting moment. "I know, it's a long time." She squeezed his hand back, a brief, reflexive action. "I'm sorry, I'm just wired. It's been a huge week. Victor is closing the Henderson deal." Victor, the name hung in the air between them, heavy and unwelcome. Victor Langston was Camille's boss, the charismatic, rapacious head of the private equity firm, where she'd been a rising star for the past 2 years. Nathan had met him twice. Both times, Langston had looked at him with a placid, dismissive curiosity, the way one might look at a piece of uninteresting furniture. "That's great for him," Nathan said, trying to steer the conversation back. "But tonight is for us. I have something for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and slid a small velvet box across the table. It wasn't flashy. Inside wasn't a massive diamond or a piece of designer jewelry. It was a custom-made silver locket. He'd designed it himself, working with a local artisan in the quarter. It was shaped like a magnolia blossom, and the filigree was inspired by the ironwork on their first apartment building. Inside, a tiny, meticulously engraved inscription, Amor Fati, love of one's fate. It was a phrase they'd discovered together in a philosophy class at Tulane, a mantra for their early, struggling years. Camille opened it. Her expression was unreadable. "Oh, Nate," she breathed. "It's so thoughtful." She traced the engraving with her nail, and for a second, Nathan thought he saw a flicker of the woman he'd married. Then, her eyes lifted from the locket and looked past his shoulder, a sudden, brilliant smile blooming on her face. A smile he hadn't received all evening. "Victor!" she exclaimed, her voice bright and loud. "What are you doing here?" Nathan turned. There he was, Victor Langston in the flesh, striding toward their table as if he owned the place. He probably owned a piece of it, Nathan mused darkly. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than Nathan's first car, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his tan aggressively healthy. He radiated an aura of expensive cologne and effortless dominance. "Camille, darling," Victor purred, leaning down to kiss her cheek, his hand lingering on her shoulder. "I was having a drink at the bar. Couldn't help but notice the most brilliant analyst in my firm celebrating. Don't tell me it's that anniversary you mentioned." He finally acknowledged Nathan with a nod. "Adam, good to see you." "It's Nathan." Nathan said, his voice flat. Of course, Victor said, waving a dismissive hand. He pulled a chair over from an empty table, not waiting for an invitation. Mind if I join you for a moment? We need to toast this wonderful occasion. He snapped his fingers, and a waiter, who had been ignoring Nathan's attempts to get his attention for 10 minutes, materialized instantly. A bottle of the Veuve Clicquot Grande Dame, the 08. The champagne arrived with theatrical pomp. Victor dominated the conversation, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that filled the space around them. He spoke of billion-dollar mergers, of weekends in the Hamptons, of a world so far removed from Nathan's life, of municipal contracts and soil composition reports that it felt like a different language. And Camille. Camille blossomed under his attention. She was sharp, witty, laughing at all the right moments, adding insightful comments about the market, her face animated and alive. She was a stranger to Nathan, a dazzling, polished version of his wife he had never met. He sat in silence, the thoughtful handmade locket still sitting in its open box on the table, a forgotten relic. He felt small, invisible. Victor asked him, with feigned interest, what he did again. I'm a civil engineer, Nathan said. Ah, right, bridges and things, Victor said with a condescending smile. Important work, very concrete. He chuckled at his own joke. Camille laughed with him, a high, tinkling sound that grated on Nathan's nerves. The humiliation was a slow, creeping thing. It was in the way Camille's body was angled toward Victor. It was in the way Victor would start a sentence with, Camille and I were just saying in Monaco. It was in the way they discussed the Henderson deal, using acronyms and jargon that were clearly meant to exclude him. He was a spectator at his own anniversary dinner. The final, sharpest cut came when the waiter brought the check. Before Nathan could even reach for it, Victor had plucked it from the silver tray. My treat, of course, he said with a grand wave of his hand. A small bonus for my star performer. He glanced at Nathan. And for you, Nathan, happy anniversary. Camille beamed. Victor, you shouldn't have. But she didn't protest. She didn't defend her husband's right to pay for their anniversary dinner. She simply accepted it as if it were her due. The ride home was a tomb of silence. The air in the car was thick with unspoken words, with the ghost of Victor Langston's expensive cologne. Camille stared out her window, the city lights sliding across her impassive face. Nathan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, the steady thrum of the engine, the only sound. When they got inside their quiet, tastefully decorated uptown home, the silence broke. It didn't break with an apology or an explanation. It shattered. What was that, Camille? Nathan's voice was dangerously quiet. She tossed her keys into a ceramic bowl on the console table, the clatter echoing in the foyer. What was what? Victor was being generous. It was a lovely gesture. A lovely gesture? He crashed our 10th anniversary dinner. He patronized me, he ignored me, and you let him. You encouraged him. Camille spun around, her eyes flashing with a cold fire he'd never seen before. Oh, I'm sorry, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Was his success intimidating to you? Did it make you feel uncomfortable to be around someone who is actually ambitious, who is building an empire instead of just checking stress tolerances on concrete? The jab was so precise, so cruel, it stole his breath. This has nothing to do with his success, and you know it. This is about respect, our respect for us. No, that's where you're wrong, she shot back, taking a step closer. This has everything to do with success, my success. I am on the verge of something huge, Nate. I'm in the room where it happens. I am flying. And you are content to just stay on the ground. He stared at her, the woman he had loved for more than a decade, and felt a chasm opening between them, a vast, terrifying canyon. I'm proud of my work, he said, his voice strained. I build things that last, things that keep people safe. I thought you were proud of that too. Camille let out a short, bitter laugh. It was the ugliest sound he had ever heard. Proud? Oh, honey, I was. When we were young, it was noble. It was sweet. But it's not enough anymore. I've outgrown it. I've outgrown this. She gestured around their beautiful home, a home he had lovingly helped renovate, as if it were a cage. The words hung there, shimmering with malice. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones. "What are you saying, Cam?" She looked him dead in the eye, and the last vestiges of warmth, of shared history, of love, vanished. Her expression was one of clinical assessment, as if she were analyzing a failing stock. "I'm saying you're a good man, Nathan. You're steady, you're reliable, you're a solid foundation." She said the word foundation like it was an insult. "But I don't want to stand still on a foundation anymore. I want to be in the skyscraper. And the truth is, you're too small for my life now. You're just too small." The two words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence. Too small. He, a man who measured his life's work in tons of steel and cubic yards of concrete, who understood the immense power of tensile strength and the integrity of a well-laid beam, was being dismissed as insignificant. The architect of their life together had just been told the structure he'd built was nothing but a shack in the shadow of her glittering ambitions. The floor gave way beneath him, and Nathan Adeyemi, the man who built things that last, was in free fall. The weeks that followed were a blur of gray monotony. The vibrant, jazz-infused colors of New Orleans seemed to have been bled from the world, leaving only shades of concrete and dust. Camille moved out with the swift, brutal efficiency of a corporate takeover. One day, the house was filled with the scent of her perfume and the clutter of her life. The next, there were gaping holes on the bookshelves, empty hangers in the closet, and a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. She took the sleek modern furniture, the abstract art, the symbols of the life she was ascending to. She left behind the old solid wooden pieces they'd refinished together, the framed photos from their early years, the relics of the man she had deemed too small. Nathan went through the motions. He went to work, his mind a fog of calculations and code requirements that offered a temporary sterile refuge. He reviewed schematics for a new flood wall along the industrial canal, his red pen hovering over drawings of reinforced concrete, the irony a bitter taste in his mouth. He was designing structures to withstand a Category 5 hurricane, yet his own life had been demolished by 2 words. He would drive home through the familiar streets, past the lively shotgun houses of the Irish Channel and the stately mansions of the Garden District, and see everything through a new, painful lens. He saw couples laughing on their porches, families walking their dogs, the simple, sturdy architecture of ordinary lives. It was everything he'd had, everything he'd valued, and everything that had been deemed insufficient. His grief was a quiet, suffocating thing. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the hollow ache in his chest when he woke up to an empty space beside him in bed. It was the muscle memory of buying her favorite coffee beans at the market. It was the crushing weight of coming home to a house that was no longer a home, but merely a structure. One Saturday, desperate for a change of scenery, he found himself walking aimlessly through the French Quarter. He avoided the boisterous crowds on Bourbon Street, instead sticking to the quieter, sun-dappled lanes. He wasn't a tourist. He was a student of the city's soul. His secret passion, the one Camille had always dismissed as a quaint hobby, was the study of historic architecture. He would spend hours sketching the intricate patterns of cast-iron railings, marveling at the genius of Creole courtyards designed for passive cooling, running his hands over the textured, centuries-old brick of a wall. He found solace in the endurance of these buildings. They had survived fires, floods, wars, and the relentless march of time. They had foundations sunk deep into the city's soft, alluvial soil. They were the opposite of the flimsy, glass and steel world Victor Langston inhabited. They were real. They were honest. This passion was connected to a part of his life he rarely spoke of, even to Camille. The Adeyemi family wasn't ostentatious, but they were not without means. His grandfather, an immigrant from Nigeria with a brilliant mind for business, had built a small real estate empire in Texas and Louisiana. He had established a significant trust, not to create idle descendants, but to empower them to be builders. "Do not simply live in the world," his grandfather used to say. "Add to it. Build something that will outlast you." Nathan had always lived modestly, by choice. He believed in earning his own way, in the dignity of his profession. The trust was a safety net, a tool he had never felt the need to use. To him, wealth wasn't about flashy cars or designer suits. It was about the freedom to create, the power to preserve. Camille knew about the trust, of course, but she'd never understood the philosophy behind it. She saw it as a stagnant pond, a frustrating lack of ambition on his part, when it could have been a fountain funding the lifestyle she craved. As he walked, his path led him, as if by some cruel magnetic force, to the street where Maison Lumière stood. A large, unceremonious sign was plastered across the grand oak doors. Closed. A smaller notice, taped to the window, detailed the bankruptcy proceedings in stark, legalistic font. He stood across the street, watching the building. The gas lamps were dark. The windows were blank and empty. The place that had been the stage for his life's greatest humiliation was now a hollow shell. A flicker of grim satisfaction ignited within him, hot and sharp, but it died just as quickly, replaced by something else. Sadness. It wasn't sadness for the failed restaurant, but for the building itself. It was a magnificent structure, a piece of the city's history, now left to rot. He crossed the street and laid a hand on the warm brick of the facade. He could feel the stories within it, the decades of laughter, conversation, and life that had echoed through its halls. He closed his eyes, and his engineer's mind, his builder's soul, began to see past the decay. He saw the original brickwork hidden beneath layers of cheap plaster inside. He envisioned the grand, sweeping staircase that was surely boarded up behind a modern, minimalist wall. He could almost hear the ghosts of the past, not just his own painful one, but the ghosts of a bygone era. And then a new sound began to filter in. It was the smoky, soulful wail of a saxophone, the syncopated rhythm of a stand-up bass, the tinkling of a piano. It was the sound of New Orleans. An idea began to form, not as a coherent thought, but as a feeling, a deep, resonant hum in his chest. It started as a whisper. What if? What if this place of pain could be transformed into a place of beauty? What if he could take this broken thing and make it whole again, make it stronger? He saw it suddenly, with absolute clarity. Not a stuffy, pretentious French restaurant, but something that truly belonged to the city. A jazz supper club, a place built on the bedrock of New Orleans culture, a place of warmth and authenticity. A place where the music was as important as the food, where history was honored, not just used as a backdrop. The name came to him in a flash, so powerful and so right it felt like a revelation. The foundation. It was a triple entendre, the literal foundation of the historic building he would restore, the foundation of jazz and blues music on which the city's culture was built. And for him, a new foundation for his own life, a new starting point, built not on the rubble of his marriage, but from the solid ground of his own passion and strength. He stayed there for a long time, his hand resting on the brick as the sun began to set, casting long shadows down the street. The grief was still there, a dull ache in his core, but it was no longer all-consuming. It was now mingling with a new, unfamiliar feeling. Purpose. He walked away from the shuttered building, not with the shuffling gait of a defeated man, but with a new stride. It was steady. It was measured. It was the walk of a man who was about to build something. That night, for the first time in months, he didn't dream of Camille. He dreamt of blueprints. And the next morning, he called the family lawyer. "I need to access the trust," he said, his voice clear and firm. "I'm buying a building." The purchase was a quiet affair, conducted through a series of lawyers and LLCs tied to the Adeyemi family trust. Nathan's name appeared on none of the initial public documents. He wanted no fanfare, no attention. This was not a vanity project. It was a resurrection, both for the building and for himself. The day the keys were placed in his hand, he walked into the cavernous, silent space of the former Maison Lumière alone. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light, piercing the boarded-up windows. The air was stale, thick with the ghosts of last year's culinary ambitions and his own fresh, raw memories. He stood on the exact spot where Victor Langston had so casually dismissed him, where Camille had looked at him with eyes full of pity and ambition. The phantom pain was real, a cold knot in his stomach. For a moment, doubt washed over him. Was this an act of healing or a monumental act of self-torture, chaining himself to the very site of his heartbreak? He took a deep breath, held it, and then let it out slowly. He was an engineer. He knew how to assess a structure. He looked past the superficial decay, the peeling paint, the stained carpets, the soulless, trendy light fixtures, and focused on the bones. The magnificent hand-hewn cypress beams arching across the ceiling, the solid 2-foot-thick brick walls that had stood for 140 years, the graceful curve of the main staircase, hidden as he'd suspected behind a sheet of drywall. The foundation was sound. Everything else was just noise. The doubt receded, replaced by a surge of creative energy. He wasn't here to dwell on the past. He was here to excavate the future. The first phase was deconstruction. Nathan was on site every day, not as a distant owner in a hard hat, but as part of the crew. He wore dusty jeans and worn leather work boots, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was the first to arrive, and the last to leave. He personally wielded a crowbar to pry away the cheap modern affectations the previous owners had installed. With every layer of drywall he tore down, with every section of synthetic flooring he ripped up, it felt like he was peeling away a layer of his own pain, exposing something stronger and more authentic underneath. The construction crew, a team of seasoned New Orleans craftsmen, were initially wary of the quiet, intense man who owned the deed. They were used to developers who showed up once a week in a clean SUV to bark orders. But they saw Nathan haul debris, study century-old blueprints he'd unearthed from the city archives, and argue passionately with a supplier about the precise patina on a brass fixture. He spoke their language, the language of materials, of integrity, of doing a job right. Respect grew, silent and solid. They stopped calling him boss and started calling him Nate. He pored over the original architectural plans, his engineer's mind captivated by the elegant, simple solutions of the past. He decided to restore, not just renovate. The hidden staircase was painstakingly uncovered, and its mahogany banister brought back to a deep, lustrous shine. The crew discovered a series of beautiful, arched brick openings between the main rooms, which had been filled in to create a more intimate dining experience. Nathan had them all reopened, creating a graceful, flowing space that felt both grand and welcoming. The vision for the foundation crystallized during this process. It would be a temple to authenticity. He sourced reclaimed sinker cypress, wood that had been lost in the bayous a century ago, and had absorbed the character of the water for the long, sweeping bar. He commissioned a local artisan, a third-generation blacksmith, to forge custom gas lamps that mimicked the original fixtures, their flames casting a warm, living light that no LED bulb could ever replicate. The centerpiece of the main room would be the stage. Nathan designed it himself, obsessing over the acoustics. He consulted with sound engineers and veteran musicians, ensuring that every note from a saxophone, every subtle brush of a snare drum, would carry through the room with perfect clarity. It wasn't an afterthought, it was the heart of the building. He knew the music had to be as genuine as the architecture. Through a friend of a friend, he sought out Marcus Dubois, a legendary trumpet player who had been a titan of the New Orleans jazz scene in the 70s and 80s, before semi-retiring to a life of teaching and occasional gigs. Nathan found him playing in a small, smoky bar in the Marigny, his notes still pure and full of soul. Nathan sat with Marcus over a table littered with design sketches and a bottle of bourbon. He didn't talk about profit margins or marketing strategies. He spoke of the building's history, of the Sinker Cypress bar, of the acoustics of the stage. He spoke of creating a home for real music, a place that respected the artists as much as the patrons. Marcus, a man with weary eyes and a deep, rumbling voice, listened intently. He'd seen 100 club owners come and go, all of them full of slick promises. But there was something different about this quiet engineer. "You call it the foundation," Marcus said, swirling the bourbon in his glass. "Why?" "Because nothing good can last if it's built on something weak," Nathan replied simply. "This place is built on the history of this city, on the integrity of these old walls, on the soul of the music you play. That's the only foundation that matters." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "I'll be your musical director," he said, extending a hand, "but on one condition. No top 40 covers, no bachelorette party requests for When the Saints Go Marching In. We play real jazz, we play the blues, we play the soul of this city." "That's the only reason I'm doing this," Nathan said, shaking his hand. The deal was sealed. As the months passed, Nathan transformed along with the building. The hollowed-out look in his eyes was replaced by a focused intensity. The slump in his shoulders straightened. He lost the soft edges of a comfortable office life. his body hardened by physical labor. He was covered in a perpetual layer of sawdust and plaster dust, and he had never felt cleaner. He was no longer the man who had been told he was too small. He was a man building a world. He didn't think about Camille often. When he did, it wasn't with the sharp agony of before, but with a distant, detached sadness. He heard through mutual acquaintances that she was thriving, that Victor Langston's firm was making headlines, that she had moved into a stunning penthouse in the warehouse district. It was a different universe, and he felt no desire to even look at the stars in her sky. His universe was here, within these brick walls, filled with the scent of fresh-cut wood, the taste of construction dust, and the promise of music. The final weeks were a controlled frenzy. The kitchen was installed, the custom-made leather banquettes were delivered, and the sound system was calibrated to perfection. The night before the grand opening, Nathan stood alone in the center of the main room. The gas lamps were lit, casting a golden, flickering glow on the polished wood floors and the exposed brick. The stage was empty, but it hummed with potential. The bar gleamed, its rows of glasses waiting. He ran a hand along the reclaimed wood of the bar, feeling the smooth, rippling grain of the ancient cypress. He had done it. He had taken the site of his deepest wound and turned it into something beautiful, something strong. He hadn't erased the memory of that night. He had built over it, laying a new solid foundation of his own making. The building was ready, and so, he realized, was he. Opening night. An electric current hummed through the air, a fusion of nervous energy and heady anticipation. The Foundation was the most talked about new venue in New Orleans, its restoration chronicled in hushed, reverent tones by the city's culture blogs. Nathan, dressed in an impeccably tailored but understated dark suit, moved through the space, not as a lord surveying his manor, but as a host ensuring his guests were happy. He adjusted a sconce, shared a quiet word with a bartender, and gave a reassuring nod to Marcus Dubois, who stood by the stage, trumpet in hand, looking as regal as a king. The doors opened, and the city flowed in. It was a perfect cross-section of New Orleans. Old money couples from the Garden District, young artists from the Bywater, food critics, musicians, and politicians, all mingling under the warm glow of the gas lamps. The sound of excited chatter was a symphony, soon to be joined by the even sweeter sound of jazz. Nathan felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He watched the faces of his guests, saw their eyes widen as they took in the soaring ceilings, their heads nod in appreciation as Marcus and his quintet launched into a smoky, soulful rendition of a Duke Ellington classic. This was real. This was his. Across town, Camille Adeyemi was getting ready, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. The past few months had not been kind. Victor Langston's empire, which had seemed so invincible, was beginning to show cracks. Whispers of SEC investigations and cooked books had started circulating, and the swaggering confidence of his inner circle had been replaced by a paranoid, defensive crouch. The Henderson deal had stalled. The promised promotions and bonuses had vanished. Her penthouse apartment, once a symbol of her arrival, now felt like a gilded cage, its rent a looming monthly threat. Victor had grown distant, his charm replaced by a volatile temper. The lavish parties had stopped. The future she had gambled everything on was starting to look like a fantasy. She felt a desperate need to be seen, to be relevant, to feel the pulse of the city's elite. "You have to come," her friend, a publicist named Tara, had insisted over the phone. "It's the opening of that new place, the Foundation. Everyone who is anyone will be there. It's supposed to be incredible." And so, Camille was here. She and Tara managed to get past the velvet rope, and as she stepped inside, the sheer beauty of the place took her breath away. It was magnificent. The restoration was flawless, a perfect marriage of historic authenticity and modern elegance. The atmosphere was intoxicating, sophisticated but soulful, alive with energy and incredible music. It was everything she aspired to, a world she felt was slipping from her grasp. She had no idea who the owner was. The name had been a closely guarded secret, adding to the venue's mystique. She scanned the crowd, looking for familiar faces, for potential networking opportunities, for a lifeline. She felt a pang of something uncomfortable, a strange sense of déjà vu. The building itself felt familiar. She shook it off. It was probably just another one of the city's many historic properties. She watched from the edge of the crowd, nursing a glass of champagne she couldn't really afford, feeling like an outsider. She saw the city's mayor laughing with a prominent developer. She saw the owner of the Saints holding court by the bar. This was the room she wanted to be in, but she felt invisible. After the first set, a man in a sharp suit stepped up to the microphone on the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming through the sound system, "thank you all for being here tonight. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the heart and soul behind this incredible place, the man who brought this building back to life. Please give a warm welcome to the owner of the foundation." A single spotlight cut through the dim, warm light, illuminating the stage. Camille craned her neck, curious to see which local tycoon had bankrolled this masterpiece. And then Nathan Adeyemi stepped into the light. The air rushed from Camille's lungs. The champagne glass felt impossibly heavy in her hand. It couldn't be. It was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by stress and wishful thinking. But it was him, her Nathan, the man she had left, the man she had called quiet, simple, and small. He stood on that stage, bathed in golden light, looking out at a sea of adoring faces. And he did not look small. He looked immense. The crowd erupted in applause. Camille was frozen, a statue in the midst of the celebration. Tara nudged her. "Wow, do you know him? He's handsome." Camille couldn't speak. She could only stare, her mind reeling, trying to connect the humble civil engineer she had discarded with the confident, commanding presence on the stage. Nathan waited for the applause to die down, a small, genuine smile on his face. He wasn't arrogant. He was grounded. He looked comfortable in his own skin in a way she had never seen before. He leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," he began, his voice calm and steady, carrying a warmth that reached every corner of the room. "Welcome to the foundation." He spoke about the building first, about its history, its strong bones. They say that to build something new, you often have to tear the old thing down. But I don't think that's always true. Sometimes the most beautiful things are built on what was already there. You just have to have the vision to see its potential, to see the strength that's been hiding all along. Every word was a perfectly aimed arrow, piercing through Camille's shock and finding its mark in her heart. He wasn't looking at her. He didn't even know she was there, but it felt as if he were speaking directly to her, across a vast, unbridgeable divide. "This place is called the Foundation for a reason," he continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Because nothing worthwhile, nothing that's meant to last, can be built on something weak or dishonest. A good foundation, whether it's in a building like this, in a community, or in a life, has to be solid. It has to be true. It has to be able to withstand the storm, and God knows this city has seen its share of storms." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Camille felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. Her life with Victor, the life she had chosen, was a skyscraper built on sand, and she could feel the ground beginning to shift. Nathan didn't mention his personal journey, his pain, or his heartbreak. He didn't need to. It was all there, in the loving way he spoke of the reclaimed wood, in the pride in his voice when he thanked his construction crew by name, in the deep respect he showed when he introduced Marcus Dubois and the band. He had poured his pain not into revenge, but into creation. He hadn't torn anything down. He had built something beautiful. As he finished his speech to another round of thunderous applause, Camille's phone buzzed in her purse. It was a news alert. She glanced at it numbly. Langston Capital, raided by FBI. CEO Victor Langston, arrested on charges of fraud and embezzlement. It was over. The penthouse, the ambition, the entire glittering facade. It had all just collapsed. She looked up at the stage, at Nathan, who was now shaking hands with the mayor. He hadn't sought revenge. He hadn't needed to. He had simply chosen to build on solid ground, while she had built her life on a lie. Camille turned and slipped out of the club, unnoticed, melting back into the humid New Orleans night. The soulful sound of Marcus Dubois' trumpet followed her for a block, a mournful, beautiful testament to everything she had lost. She was left with nothing but the crushing, definitive weight of her own colossal misjudgment. The man she had called too small had just built a world, and she wasn't welcome in it. Inside, Nathan didn't look for her in the crowd. He didn't even think of her. His work was done. He leaned against the magnificent cypress bar, ordered a Sazerac, and listened to the music. He watched the people, the life, the joy that filled the space he had created. He felt the deep, resonant thrum of the stand-up bass through the floorboards, a vibration that traveled up into his very soul. It was the feeling of a strong foundation, and he was finally, securely, home. Have you ever been underestimated by someone close to you? Share your story in the comments below. Like this video if you believe in building something beautiful from pain, and subscribe to Amara Folktales for more powerful stories.